I'm Jeff Schloss. I'm a population biologist interested in evolutionary accounts of altruism, moral cognition, and religious belief and practice. And I'm interested in these things both from an empirical and theoretical scientific perspective, but also with respect to their theological and philosophical implications. I should also say, though, that in addition to the research, who I am is also a teacher. That's not a distraction from who I am, but I love interacting with my students. So the area of research that I'm interested in, evolutionary theories of human behavior, altruism, and moral cognition, matters to me not just because of their pretty straightforward central general significance, but also matters to me personally for a kind of an idiosyncratic reason. I wanted to be a scientist since I was a little kid. I collected butterflies, I had chemistry and physics sets and model rockets, and as I grew older, I wasn't raised in a religious household, I began to ask questions about whether there was a God, what life was for, what my life was about. I remember in 6th grade, I came across this little quote in my world history book from Confucius that said, "To know what one knows and to know what one does not know is the characteristic of one who knows." And I went to my teacher and I said, "Wow, this is what I want to learn. When do we get to study this?" And he said, "Oh, that's philosophy. You have to wait till you get to college." So I kind of tuned out of school for the rest of school and started college as a philosophy major. But I despaired of the opportunity to put these two interests and these two ways of questioning the world together, and I dropped out. I became a surf bum, and during those years I met Christ. My life was profoundly changed, and I think actually saved. And you know, some people confess to a difficulty of putting together their science and faith, but my experience was the exact opposite. After meeting Christ, I found newfound consonance between the questions, the central questions the humanities raised, and the discoveries and inquiries of science. And to this day, that's still the case, that being a Christian fueled my interest in science in new ways and made it more significant. And I love it every day I get up. So why should anybody care about these questions of the relationship between evolution and the things that we consider to be essential to our human identity? Altruism, moral awareness, and even religious belief. For one reason, and this might not sound like what you'd expect me to say, is just because it's fascinating. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people weighing in on these issues, philosophically and theologically, can't even identify the birds or the trees in their backyard. And I think the engagement with the feeling of the organism is itself fascinating, but secondly, because these questions really are central to, no matter where you come down on the answers, they're central to the questions that all humans ask. And I'd throw in a third one, because these questions are so central, sadly, discussion is so polarized. So I really yearn, and I yearn to see others yearn, to bring people together in civil commerce on these topics, not only for the sake of civil society, but for the reason that none of us have all the answers straight, and we need commerce with one another. One of the perennial questions in both bioscience and philosophy is, are humans unique? Are they exceptional in some way, and if so, in one way? And there are kind of two ways to get at this question. One is from the perspective of kind of the Aristotelian notion of, do we have distinctive ends? And Aristotle asked this question about all species. The Westminster Catechism has an answer to that. It says, this is the chief end of man, to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. And I actually think that does make humans unique. But then we can ask the question, the kind of ontological question of, are there special capacities that we have that equip us to pursue this end? And by the way, that question of capacities would exist whether or not you believe this theological claim. And I think we do have special capacities. Again, back to Aristotle, he thought it was reason, and the Enlightenment thought that as well. But I and a lot of my colleagues, regardless of religious view in the biosciences these days, think that there are other capacities. First of all, humans cooperate at a scale that is unique, that is, in the words of Ernst Fehr, constitute a spectacular outlier in evolution. And then we can ask a deeper question still. Are there capacities that allow us to do that? And I would say moral and religious cognition, that those are essential to what is human. So while we might see foreshadowings or precursors to those capacities in other animals, the degree of their development in humanity looks to be really distinctive. And not just distinctive, that we don't see it in other creatures, but essential. That if we somehow lose those capacities, we lose something crucial to our human identity. One big question that people in general ask, but that evolutionary biologists and philosophers of religion are asking is religious belief a mere product of evolution? And if so, then why believe? What warrant is there to believe? And so, first of all, the term mere product is a little misleading, but if our capacity to form beliefs, whether religious or for that matter mathematical, is embodied in neural structures, well then to that extent they're products of evolution if you believe that human beings have evolved. But there's a difference between saying a capacity to form a particular belief, or even maybe a disposition, a receptivity toward certain beliefs might have evolved, and saying particular beliefs are the product of evolution. I don't know that anyone says that. So particular beliefs are a product of reason, of evidence, of cultural innovation and instruction. And then we have to ask the question, well, then what reason is there to believe? Lastly, as a Christian, I actually believe that certain beliefs are a function of divine encounter. That if there is a God, and if we are so constructed, perhaps by evolution, to be aware of and receptive to Him, that we might actually experience Him in ways that contribute to our beliefs. So, I mean, obviously a huge issue and polarized issue in our culture is whether, and if so, how we could reconcile evolution with the creation account of Christianity, and for that matter, the other religions of the book. And at one level, at the general level, I actually think there's not only an absence of conflict, but a remarkable consonance that the cosmos had a beginning, that certain features of that cosmos appear to be finely tuned or finely structured to support not only the existence of life, but the emergence of higher life. And by the way, my colleagues, with or without religious belief, accept those things. That there is a historical arc to the history of life. All these things, I think, are remarkably consonant with the biblical notion of a creator God achieving His purposes through history. Now, there are other more narrow historiographic questions, like was there an Adam and Eve, and if so, when and where? My own personal belief is that those questions are not essential to the Christian faith. My experience of the life-changing invasion of Christ didn't hinge on those questions. And personally, I actually think they're similar to what Paul calls foolish controversies and endless genealogies. I hate to see these get in the way of the gospel. So I have students and folks in the church I go to and where I speak who ask, how can you study what you study and make sense of that in light of your Christian faith? And actually, my Christian faith informs what I'm studying. So there's one tradition in Christianity called natural theology, where you try to make inferences from God and even draw conclusions or reason for the existence of character of God from your observations in the natural world. But there's another approach. The other approach is to generate hypotheses about the natural world based on what you believe is true. And now you have to be honest when you investigate those hypotheses. You can't just be searching for proof to prove what you've already decided is true, but the way I relate my Christian faith to my scholarship is I have certain hunches about what the world is like, what human nature is like. And by the way, there are people without faith that also have these hunches. Like humans are built to flourish with altruism, that humans are built with a disposition toward certain beliefs about the Constitution and Creator of the world. So my faith informs the questions that I ask. And then it's just the fun of seeing what the direction the evidence points. Have I ever struggled in making sense of the relationship between science and my faith? And this might sound intellectually duplicitous or shallow, but my experience of the changes that God made in my life, my hearing from others that they note that I have changed, and the sense that my faith has made of the world, I actually haven't struggled. But I have struggled on one account, not so much my faith in Christ as my view of the world. As I was studying evolutionary biology and encountered the problem of altruism, that evolution would suggest that there's no genuinely altruistic behavior. And I actually thought, wow, can I think of one example of a plant making nectar just for the generosity of it, or a creature evidencing cooperative behavior in a way that didn't in any way reciprocate or return. I had not my faith, but I think my perhaps overly romanticized view of the world shaken a bit. The world is much more ambiguous than I had taken it to be, and I think actually this happened in the 19th century as folks moved out of the temperate region and discovered the deeper parasitism and parasitoidism of the tropics. So yeah, I think my romanticized view of nature was shaken, and this drove me theologically deeper into an understanding of the creation. By the way, P.S., it turns out actually not to be true that there's absolutely no altruism in nature. We've found examples of this across the phylogenetic continuum, but nevertheless, it remains the case that nature's a lot more complicated, a lot more ambiguous than maybe a romanticized view would suggest. I'm interested in evolutionary accounts of religious belief and behavior, and actually these questions go back at least as far as Hume, who said there are two things that merit our attention with respect to religion. One is the reasons for belief, and the other is its root in human nature. So on the one hand, like mathematics, we might have reasons that get us to conclude certain things about math or the existence of God, but independent or interacting with that, we might just have certain natural dispositions toward certain views or beliefs. And by the way, it looks like we do have natural dispositions toward dualism and purpose. Deb Kellerman refers to children as promiscuous teleologists. But there's one thing that the recent evolutionary studies of our disposition to belief have left out. And that's not just the disposition to ascribe purpose, but the actual possible experience of the presence of a transcendent being. And Pascal has this wonderful reflection on the role of reason and experience. On the one hand, he says man is a reed, blown about by the wind, but he's a thinking reed. And it is by thinking rightly that we must distinguish ourselves. And on the other hand, he says, it's not by the proud exertions of reason, but by the humble submissions of reason that we must come to know ourselves. And so you ask, what is it to which we submit? It might be fundamental intuitions, but in some cases, in Pascal's case actually, it was to an overwhelming self-authenticating experience of the reality and the presence of a loving God. I think sometimes God has his own ways of dealing with different people and different personalities in different moments, but I think sometimes we too easily overlook the promise that each of us in our own ways can experience the presence and life-transforming engagement with God in our lives.